This is so freaking fun. It's like brand new gifts every day. The news just keeps on giving, and we get to cover it and be detectives and dive in to new Switch 2 stuff each and every morning. So, good morning, Mario, and good morning, Switch fans. I got some Doc Pop Poppy, my literal favorite drink of the freaking year. Today, we're talking about The Verge getting in on verifying Switch 2 leaks and seeing pictures of the dock and system itself. More details on the Pro Controller, new details on the Joy-Con, and other sources corroborating information to make things even more likely and legit. What's going on, everybody? It's Zach with SwitchForce. This is the most legit place for Nintendo Switch 2 before launch, during launch, and after launch. The channel's about to go crazy. I'm so glad to have you along for the ride. Thanks for being here. Hit that like button if you enjoy the videos. Let's dive right in. We got a lot to cover. The Verge, a very popular entertainment website, they got in on the Switch 2 stuff. Now, to me, this is very important because this is not a Reddit poster. This is not a internet user. This is by all accounts, a legitimate journalistic site written by somebody that spent 15 years editing CNET, Gizmodo, and Engadget, and they have spoken with Next Handheld. Now, Next Handheld is the person who posted on r/Nintendo Switch 2 that they have a Switch 2 and that they can answer questions and that they'll prove it on Christmas. The person we've been talking about for the past few days. So they say that they've talked with them and heard and seen enough to think they might be legit. I've seen 2 photos of a possible Nintendo Switch 2 dock, writes The Verge author, and 1 photo of the inside of a possible Switch 2 controller rail covered in certification logos and with copper contacts exposed, which also shows its metal kickstand hinge open at an angle. Notably, the dock was not included in the 3D scan that's circulating among case manufacturers. If Next Handheld is telling the truth, we now know a good bit more about Nintendo's next console. For as much as we'd like to be called the Super Nintendo Switch, we now know it's going to be the Nintendo Switch 2. So this is very good. This is not anybody that you find on Twitter or Blue Sky or Fama boards. This is people saying, hey, we've seen the pictures and they're legit. The logo basically looks like this, Switch 2 with Nintendo Switch, which is what we've heard. The magnetic controllers have drift-resistant Joy-Cons, and the dock is going to be a lower profile dock with a curve. But something's very interesting here, and they reference it by saying the dock may have a different trick up its sleeve. Now, I don't believe Next Handheld really mentioned this, so this is interesting and the new piece of information that I'm finding from the Verge article. They talk about the U-shaped kickstand. They talk about, the Joy-Con, the magnetic connection. But extra power when docked is where I want to draw your attention. Once upon a time, Nintendo was reportedly planning to release a Switch Pro, one that would output 4K graphics when docked. This was the whole Switch Pro calamity of 2021 that eventually became the Switch OLED. That was quite a saga, if you remember or were a part of it. That didn't happen, but the Nintendo Switch 2's dock might be designed to let the handheld run a bit faster. On Reddit, Next Handheld cryptically teased that asking if the dock had a fan was the right question, and in a picture shared with The Verge, I can see the alleged dock has big feet around back. One's positioned so it can lie down horizontally without blocking a set of vents. Vents for a dock. I don't think my dock has any vents. This dock right here, Nintendo Switch dock, no vents. There's just the port for the Switch, and honestly, if you broke this off, broke the front and back, it would still be the same thing, right? It's just a housing for the Switch. There's nothing extra going on there. It's not meant to do anything or add anything whatsoever. But The Verge says, well, I don't imagine you'd intentionally put it on its back, as the handle might fall out completely with the open slot up top. I can't imagine Nintendo wanting to make sure the console doesn't overheat if you knock it over. Intriguingly, Next Handheld says the dock is rated for 60 watts, while the Switch 2 is rated for 45 watts, both of which would be substantially higher than the original if true, and notice the discrepancy. The original Switch had an unusual 39-watt charger for both docked and handheld modes, which only provided up to 18 watts for the handheld. Now, 45 for the Switch 2 portably versus 18 for the Switch 1 portably, you can do the math. That is nearly triple the wattage. The dock, on the other hand, is nearly quadruple the wattage, and it's a significant factor higher than the handheld itself, which seems to indicate that the dock is powering the Switch to a higher level than just the Switch on its own is capable of. And vents and fans are something we've heard for a bit now about a Switch 2 dock. There's been a lot of rumors around that in the recent months. And now the fact that the picture has big feet and so it can lie down without blocking vents really seems to be the proof in the pudding that this dock is going to be important. It's going to be more than just a conversion to the TV. It's going to be something that allows an enhanced level of performance from your Switch 2, which is incredibly cool, incredibly important, something we've hypothesized about a Switch iteration for years now, like I mentioned, since the Switch Pro in 2021. And it feels like this is just par for the course in terms of what we've thought the Switch 2 would be, what we've heard rumored the Switch 2 to be, and now we're getting The Verge coming through and giving us great details. They've seen the pictures, they've talked with the leaker, and they're pretty darn good. They come up with the similar things about dark gray, a white model, a themed model based on a game that hasn't received a themed Switch, and they confirm that the leaker next handheld doesn't know really anything about the actual Switch on. They only know the Switch off, right? Like the Switch off, they can tell us a lot about that. The Switch on, they don't know a ton. But here's something that's going to get even more interesting, and this comes from Ninspider right here. Ninspider is a poster over on Famaboards who has leaked things in the past, and they are coming through with some clutch info that builds upon what we discussed yesterday with the Pro Controller and throws an interesting wrench into the entire Joy-Con discussion. Like I've said before, the floodgates are open. Things just continue to get more and more interesting, and more information just is flowing out like plumes of a beautiful peacock, blessing us with great knowledge during this holiday season. So the translation is from Nintendo Spider or Ninspider. Hello, I survived the ninja's pursuit. For several reasons, I am writing Japanese using machine translation this time. This may be the last post before that time. And that time is clearly in reference to the Switch 2 reveal itself, Nintendo's own Switch 2 reveal, not a leak. Here is some reliable information. 2 new buttons have been added to the back of the Pro Controller. That's what we heard yesterday. Now, what's interesting is this is, again, 2 new buttons. The leak yesterday that we talked about said like a ring finger button and a middle finger button for the back of the Pro Controller. And I assumed that to mean 4 buttons, but Ninspider is saying, no, it really does mean 2 buttons. And I mentioned yesterday that the translation can make things a bit difficult. The grammar can be a bit difficult to understand. Maybe there was a bit of mistranslation there. So it seems like it is 2 new buttons on the back of the Pro Controller instead of 4. So instead of 4 paddles, it would be 2 paddles. But regardless, that's a significant upgrade for a Pro Controller. And it's a significant upgrade for how Nintendo handles controllers in general. I think this will make the Pro Controller feel actually pro instead of just a controller. Because if we're honest, the Pro Controller is sure much more pro than the Joy-Con, but it's just a generic controller in comparison to other controllers. It's not elite in any way, and it isn't, going above and beyond to deliver any sort of customizable experience. This would be really cool, and I'm all about it for the Pro Controller being even better. The second half of the sentence is where it gets really weird. The new Joy-Con's back button is likely to be for input rather than release. Now, this throws a lot into question, because part of the leaks that we've heard in the past, in the recent days, all revolved around the Switch 2's new buttons on the back of the Joy-Con being to release the console, being utilized to pop those Joy-Con off and release the magnetic connection. Ninspider is indicating that those are actually buttons and not for release. Now, if you believe the Pro Controller leak, this would make a lot of sense, because now the Switch in handheld mode would be able to replicate the 2 buttons on the back of the Pro Controller, or rather, the Pro Controller's 2 buttons in the back would be able to replicate the Joy-Con's 2 buttons in the back. Now, to me, with a magnetic connection, a giant release button, outside of the usage case of it being like, hey, it just looks different so you can distinguish this as a Switch 2, that giant release button seems useless to me. It seems overboard. And I mentioned from the very first time when we talked about the eject button that to me it seemed like something Nintendo would be adding just to distinguish the Switch 2 physically from the Switch 1. The idea that they're actually buttons and inputs rather than a release makes a lot more software sense and makes a lot more functionality sense. It's less about the appearance and more about this system actually doing more, bigger, better things. At the end of the day, all of us would benefit from more buttons far more than an eject button. The thing you have to ask yourself is, why did they think it was an eject button? And does that invalidate any of the information that they said? Here's my hypothesis. If you're not able to turn the Switch 2 on, if you're not able to really see what's going on, then maybe you think that those buttons are in some way helping eject the controllers, even if they're not. Given the strong magnets, it could be sort of a placebo effect where you feel like, oh, this button is to help pull the Joy-Con off. That's what it's for, if you're not able to turn the system on and see what those buttons can do. Especially if the buttons aren't labeled specifically, or rather in the model that these people saw, the buttons weren't labeled specifically. It might be confusing as to what these buttons actually were for. And with only a physical model that can't turn on, the best guess might be an eject. If Ninspider is to be believed, they have much more access to what I would say is a functional switch. They have more access to a functional switch 2 that can turn on, and that they either have knowledge of or are in contact with someone that has used these Joy-Con buttons in an actual real use case scenario, and not just hypothesizing based on a mold or a scan or a printout or a dummy unit that they saw or got to even hold in a factory. Very interesting, and I hope this is the case. A release button is fine, but extra buttons, extra inputs is great, allowing for more customization and better accessibility, something that I think Nintendo has struggled with. Nintendo is very accessible when it comes to like fun family games, but their consoles are not very flexible or accessible when it comes to customization and when it comes to allowing the player to make the game work as best fits their hands, their body, their playstyle. Nintendo loves to make easy modes, but this would make it easier for players to experience and enjoy all of their games, and it would also, on the opposite end of the spectrum, double down and give more hardcore access to control schemes, layouts, and extra inputs. I'm very excited by this, and I hope that this update is the true story here, and that it's not just an eject. The Back to the Pro controller having 2 buttons, the Joy-Con having 2 buttons, that lines up and makes a lot of sense. Now, Ninspider continues and says, in addition, there is some unconfirmed information, but the week after the Japanese New Year may be at that time. Hint, hint, the Switch 2 reveal. However, it is also possible that it is only new information about Xenoblade Cross, which they mean Xenoblade Chronicles X. There will probably be no new information in December. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday. Now, this, I think, means no new information from Nintendo in December, which we could kind of assume. Nintendo has put out the Donkey Kong Country Returns HD trailer. The overview trailer, they just released it in the US after releasing it in the UK recently. They're not going to make any announcements, but they do say shortly after the Japanese New Year, it might be time for the Switch 2 reveal. Now, we have been hearing early in the year, first half of January, this makes sense. Ninspider is kind of covering their butt and also indicating that maybe the murmurs that they're hearing are a new trailer or some sort of new communication about Xenoblade Chronicles X, but that would be 2 months before launch, as that game has been confirmed for a March release date, so that feels odd to me. I really do believe that the early January Nintendo buzz is centered around the Switch 2, and is something that Nintendo is going to utilize as their big shebang, big reveal, big to do. They're not adjusting for leaks, they're not adjusting for Donkey Kong, they're sticking to their guns, and they're doing what they've planned all along, and that would make a lot of sense to be an early/mid-January reveal. Gets the system out in the forefront after the holiday season and allows the marketing to kick into full gear as they work towards what I believe will be a March or April launch, what some believe to be a May-June launch, and some others believe to be a June-July launch. I just don't think it's going to possibly go that long. Now, one other thing we need to talk about is this projection here. All right, Nintendo Switch 2 is projected to sell between 15 and 17 million units next year, 2025, and 80 million by 2028, with little competition from Sony and Microsoft. This is coming from WCCF Tech, and they are pretty reputable, very reputable, I would say. And they're getting this from DFC Intelligence, the longest-standing research and advisory firm focused exclusively on the video game industry. Boom. So this is not nonsense or BS. This is actual industry analysis saying that they think Nintendo is going to have a really successful year, that Sony and Microsoft aren't going to do much. Sony put out their PS5 Pro. I would say that didn't do much. Microsoft is kind of, just trying to get games out there and stay afloat. Nintendo should once again dominate the hardware space, as they have pretty much every year. 15 to 17 million units next year would be quite a lot, and would show that Nintendo is able to keep the stock aplenty. They're able to keep the shelves filled. They're able to keep the, what do you call that? Like the pathways or the manufacturing thoroughfares open and flowing and very well, just basically no scalpers. That sounds pretty good to me. 80 million by 2028 would be 2025, 2026, 2027. So like the first three and a half years, they're saying would be 80 million sold, and would help propel the Switch 2 to be on track to maybe not surpass the Switch 1, but it's going to be close. A lot of people have said that, the Switch 2 couldn't possibly do as well as the Switch 1. I don't know if that's true. I think Nintendo is just going to build on their success, and I think access to all the third-party games is just going to give more and more players a reason to own a Switch, and possibly only own a Switch as their main console rather than a secondary console, which is what I think the Switch 2 became for many of those who are not Nintendo, like hardcore, faithful, dedicated, like crazy fans. The Switch 2 was like an extra console, and then for some, the Steam Deck became the extra console as it's far more powerful than the Switch and has a much larger library. The Switch 2, though, can kind of merge those two together, allowing you to play Mario and Assassin's Creed, allowing you to play Zelda and Call of Duty, allowing you to play Pikmin, Splatoon, but also Madden. Very cool, and I think it's going to expand the audience and maybe not surpass the Switch, because that kind of has been lightning in a bottle, but come very close and still be a mega, massive, huge hit money printing machine for Nintendo. But we got great new details today. I think the biggest is this Verge article just saying they've seen the pictures of the dock, and they're saying they think it looks pretty legit, and giving us this new detail about big feet on the dock, and those big feet leading to more wattage and better performance for the Switch. But Ninspider coming through with the Pro Controller clutch info, as well as the Joy-Con wrench. Like, this is throwing a wrench in the Joy-Con story and changing things in a way that I think makes much more sense. And I think we can easily write off the miscommunication based on having a Switch 2 that you can't turn on versus a Switch 2 that you can turn on. I think that makes a lot of sense. Let me know your take in the comments down below. This story will inevitably continue to evolve and continue, and I will be back with more on the next video. But until then, thanks so much for watching. This is so exciting. What a great holiday gift from the world to us. Nintendo Switch deluge of information, tons of leaks, tons of things to discuss, and a great fun January ahead of us. That like post-holiday gloom that many of us feel, it's going to be absolutely erased by Nintendo giving us the presentation of our lifetime. So thanks so much for watching, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, stay positive out there. And until next time, thanks again. SwitchForce out.